Hello and welcome back to iThrive, rising from the depths of diabetes and obesity. I'm your host, John McMahon. I'm 120 pounds overweight, and that makes me morbidly obese. I'm also type 2 diabetic, with many of its complications, including advanced neuropathy and a lucky survivor of a silent diabetic heart attack. I'm on a journey to educate myself, make a plan, and execute a radical lifestyle turnaround, and this documentary is my invitation for you to come along with me. In our last episode, we stepped right into the middle of the low-fat, high-fat debate. Well, it's more of a religious war than a debate. And by no means was I able to fit everything I learned into one episode. I have enough content from the most brilliant minds on this topic to create its own series, and maybe I will. However, by the end of this series, you'll find out what they are both missing. Thank you for joining us in episode 5, Treating the Cause, Eating to Live, and Choosing to Thrive. Now let's cut to Dr. Susan Pierce-Thompson and begin the second half of this series, learning about what our brain has to do with the diabesity trap.
I'm Dr. Susan Pierce-Thompson. I'm the founder and CEO of Bright Line Eating Solutions, which is a company dedicated to helping people lose all their excess weight and live happy, thin, and free. I came to this through my own painful, long journey with food addiction, and then an academic history where I studied brain and cognitive sciences, got my PhD in that, was a tenured psychology professor, and taught the psychology of eating. And a few years ago, those worlds merged, and I decided to write a book about what I knew about how the brain blocks weight loss, and here we are. A recent study in the New England Journal of Medicine showed that there are over 700 million obese people in the world now, 108 million of them children. And in the last, bunch of decades, since 1980, obesity has more than doubled in 73 countries around the world. It's not just a Western American phenomenon. This is absolutely a global epidemic. I guess that makes it a pandemic. And I'm thinking about those 108 million children. I was overweight as a kid, but not overweight enough to be called a fat kid. I was just chunky. I was fleshy. I was unpopular for other reasons. I was unpopular because I was obnoxious. But I'm thinking today about the kids who are obese, and I'm thinking about their futures, how they're likely to develop diabetes in their 20s or 30s, be facing blindness and leg amputation, before midlife. But I'm also thinking about their childhood and what it's like to grow up obese. I don't know what it's like to be an obese kid, but I do know what it's like to be obese in your 20s. And what I remember is every moment of every day being colored by being in an oversized body, like every moment of every day, from first thing in the morning when I couldn't get out of bed because I was exhausted and in pain, to the next moment when I got out of bed and tried to get my slippers on, but I couldn't bend over. So I had to shuffle around to get my slippers on my feet. And it was very important that I have shoes that not need ties or buckles. Everything had to be slip-on because it was just too hard to bend over. To the activities that I restricted. I didn't want to go to parties. I didn't want to be seen by people. I didn't want photographs taken. I have no photographs of me at my highest weight. My My best fat picture, and I wish I had better fat pictures now, is of me at a size 14, 16. I got up to a size 24. I don't have a single picture of it. Not one. Why? Because I was barely leaving the house. I was going nowhere with no one. I went to work because it was required, and I came home and I closed the shades and I ate. And I'm thinking about those kids and what it's like. Kids are so ruthless. I remember how painful 6th grade was for me. And to be obese in a context of the torture that kids put each other through, the ostracization, you show up at school and nobody's talking to you and they won't tell you why. For me, nobody would play with me. Like, I spent my lunch hours and my recess and so forth in the gym playing basketball with headphones on, with Prince music blaring loud in my ears. And I just got really good at shooting free throws. Like, nobody would play with me. And to have that be because of the way you look with the size of your body, and to know that at that point, the challenge is food is the only comfort, right? Food is the go-to. Food, for me, food was my friend when I was a kid. So what we're doing to our kids is unconscionable. It's unconscionable. The first food that we feed kids, think back, parents, what's the first food other than formula or breast milk? Well, formula, forget about it. Sugar's the first ingredient. But if you're breastfeeding, after that, what's the first food? It's rice cereal. What's it made out of? Rice flour. First ingredient, the only thing that's in it, rice flour. That's the first food we feed our kids. We get them hooked on sugar and flour at 6 months old. And for almost everybody in our society, they don't go a single day without eating sugar and flour from then on. And then we have this great new invention. I don't know when it wasn't there in my childhood. So sometime between when I was a kid in the 80s and today, we invented kids' restaurant menus. And all that's on there is junk. We indoctrinate our kids that the only thing that their palates can tolerate is junk food. If it's not mac and cheese or pizza or chicken nuggets or spaghetti, it's not on the menu, right? It's absolutely criminal what we're doing to our kids. And we have a culture where you can't say no thank you to pumpkin pie on Thanksgiving without being heckled. Like, come on, you're not going to diet on Thanksgiving. Like, what do you think you are, right? Like, relax, be with us, And no understanding that we have poisonous drugs in our midst that are causing, millions of people, 4 million deaths. This New England Journal of Medicine study found that 4 million deaths can be attributed straight up to obesity each year. Just huge. And it's the biggest killer amongst us. And we have no concept of making it safe and morally acceptable, socially acceptable to eat healthy food 365 days a year. No understanding that kids will eat like we eat, and we need to expect them, to eat apples. Like, kids like apples. My kids like Brussels sprouts and broccoli. I don't mean to brag, but I never pushed it on them. I eat them almost every day. So they eat them. They think they're exciting. They beg for Brussels sprouts. It's kind of weird. So I'm just saying, our conceptions of what kids will eat are way skewed, right? And we just pander to the lowest common denominator, and we're torturing our kids. We're just torturing them. It's just awful. So there's 3 main ways that the brain blocks weight loss. It has to do with willpower, it has to do with insatiable hunger, and overpowering cravings. So I want to take those 3 and go deep on them. I wrote a book about this. I obviously can't cover a whole book, in a few minutes, but I want to at least give you the overview. If you want more, you can go to the book. But basically, our brains are actively blocking our weight loss. So what that means is that when you're asking someone who's obese to eat a calorie-restricted diet, what you're basically asking them to do is hold their breath while they run up 12 flights of stairs. It's just not possible, because the brain is going to demand what it needs, right? You'll get to the first flight and you'll start to breathe. There's just no denying the brain what it has decided it needs to survive. And there are changes that go on in the brain based on the foods that we're eating that result in the brain actively blocking our weight loss, resulting in weight loss being impossible. Now, if you think that this is extreme or far-fetched of a hypothesis, just look around you, right? How many of the obese are getting into a right-sized body? 1% per year, and 99% of those 1% gain it back over the next few years. So nobody is succeeding at this, and there is a reason for it. The brain is blocking weight loss. So let's take these 3 ways that the brain blocks weight loss. Let's take them one at a time and walk you through it. So the first way is willpower. Now, it has to do with how willpower is wired in the brain, what it actually is. Turns out willpower is a thing. It's actually a measurable brain function, and it lives in the anterior cingulate cortex, which is kind of like, a few centimeters right behind here. It sits right behind the prefrontal cortex. And the anterior cingulate cortex regulates a lot of things, but it's a very sensitive little part of the brain. It's sensitive to glucose fluctuations. It grinds to a halt if there isn't much glucose around. And it's also sensitive to how heavily it's being taxed. So it just starts to work very, very slowly and inefficiently and poorly when it's facing heavy demands. What that means is after about 15 minutes of heavy use, it stops working properly. And the challenge is that this part of the brain regulates a whole bunch of things. It regulates willpower, like resisting things, like resisting temptations, but it also regulates decision making. It regulates emotional regulation. It regulates task performance. So let me give you an idea of some of the tasks or daily activities that are going to tap the anterior cingulate cortex. Checking email. That's making decisions, right? Email comes in your inbox. Who is it? What do they want? Do I care? Am I going to read it now? Read it later? Reply all? Am I going to file it? Am I going to delete it? You just made like 9 decisions just to process one email. So you're sitting in your office and you're processing email for half an hour. Your willpower is shot, like it's gone. Now you sit in traffic for a little bit, right? Oh, first you have an uncomfortable interaction with a coworker or a boss on the way out of work, and like you're using emotional regulation, because what you really want to say is like a bunch of expletives, and you can't say that. So you're engaged in emotional regulation to be appropriate. Now your anterior cingulate cortex is more shot. You get in the car, you're in traffic, just to not flip people off and cut them off in traffic. There's more willpower regulation. Now you get home, and if you've got kids, forget about it. It's lights out, right? Kids are the classic example of emotional regulation. If you spend any time during the day doing an Excel spreadsheet, public speaking, that's performance, right? You have to be careful with, not saying too much or making sure the numbers are going in the right cells. That's going to deplete your anterior cingulate cortex. It's no wonder that you get home and you decide to order a pizza for dinner. Like literally at that moment where you're deciding what to eat, you have no access to the part of the brain that would allow you to make the right decision. So the fact that you know a lot about nutrition, the fact that you know what you should be eating, the fact that you're aware of the whole landscape of healthy food versus unhealthy food is completely irrelevant to actually making the right choice in the moment. So this is one of the biggest things that I want everyone, especially people who, espouse healthy eating, right, from on high. Like, I just want to say, it's not that people don't know what to eat. I mean, some of that is going on for sure, and I'm glad that there are people who are helping people to be educated about what to eat and what not to eat. But the issue is implementation over the long term. Like, you can't actually expect people to go out with this newfound knowledge and be making the right choices a month from now or even a week from now. No amount of desire to do it will solve this willpower depletion problem. Like, it is a serious problem. How are we not just screwed then? Well, there are some solutions. What you need to do is you need to take your eating out of the anterior cingulate cortex, meaning out of the realm of choices and willpower. You need to just assume that you're going to have no willpower to make a good choice, and you need to find a workaround. You need to find a hack. And the hack is something called automaticity. It has to do with habits that are so ingrained that they're not happening in the realm of choice and willpower. They're happening in the realm of the basal ganglia, which just executes automatic sequences, like brushing your teeth, right? Isn't it amazing that you brush your teeth, whether you're stressed out or not, whether you've been in traffic or not, whether you're traveling or not, whether you're arguing with your spouse or not? It doesn't matter, right? You wake up, you brush your teeth, you go to bed, you brush your teeth. Now, some people are feeling guilty right now because 5% of the population doesn't. But just saying, for 95% of us, we can relate to the notion that we're going to be, brushing our teeth kind of no matter what. It doesn't really matter what our circumstances are. That's the way Bright Line Eating works, and that's the way I like to get people to organize their food. So you can do it. You have to set up the system, just like you have to teach a 6-year-old to brush their teeth every day, and it takes a long time for it to be automatic for them. You need to set up the system, but you can get breakfast so well oiled that you eat it that way, and it doesn't have to be exactly the same foods. There's some tricks to like how do you swap out what exactly you're eating within the same system, but you can make that so automatic that it's happening like brushing your teeth. Like you haven't thought about it at all, and it's just happened perfectly, exactly what you want to be eating in alignment with your values. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, boom, done, solved. It involves planning. And it involves preparation because you're not making decisions in the moment. Sticking to the bright lines and being mindful of food addiction as a player in the obesity epidemic turns out to be a really necessary component, not for everybody, but I would say for the majority of people who are struggling with their weight. I think that diabetes and obesity are raging out of control because of the proliferation of sugar and flour. Sugar and flour are drugs, basically. And if you think about what a drug is, heroin and cocaine are drugs. And if you think about where they come from, right, they're these white powdery substances, but they come from plants. Cocaine comes from the coca leaf. And in the Andes Mountains, people chew coca leaves and they don't get addicted to them at all. There's actually research studies published saying they're not addictive. They give a little bit of a lift, like maybe drinking half a cup of caffeinated tea, and they make your cheek a little numb, but they're really not addictive. But if you take the inner essence of that coca leaf and you refine and you purify it down into a fine white powder, you take a normal plant, a fine plant, and you turn it into a drug. And heroin is the same way. Heroin comes from poppy plants. And you can sit in a field of poppy plants and eat them all day long, and you will fail a urine test for opium, like you will fail a drug test, but you won't have gotten high in the process, and you certainly won't be breaking into your grandmother's house to steal her VCR to sell it for heroin, right? You don't become a heroin addict off of eating poppies. But if you take the inner essence of that poppy flower and you refine and purify it into a fine powder, you've now created a drug. And so we're taking wheat, and we're taking sugarcane, and we're taking beets, and we're taking corn, and we're taking beans, and we're taking nuts, and we're taking all of these normal, healthy plants, and we're taking the inner essence, we're extracting out just the inner essence, and then we're refining and purifying it into a fine powder, and we're taking plants and we're turning them into drugs. And as a neuroscientist, I want to tell you that those drugs hit the brain just like heroin and cocaine. No difference. We have brain scans of it happening. It happens in the nucleus accumbens, which is the addiction reward center in the brain. We have brain scans of the dopamine surging in the nucleus accumbens from sugar and flour, just like with heroin and cocaine. We also have brain scans of the downregulation in the obese person of the dopamine receptors in the nucleus accumbens, showing that their dopamine receptors are so blown out, they've thinned out, they've become less numerous, less responsive, and in a brain scan, the obese brain looks worse than the cocaine and heroin addicted brain. Worse. Not by a lot, they look pretty similar actually, but the obese brain is, to my eye, a little worse. Like very little dopamine response, which means that without sugar and flour, in a steady stream, essentially, you feel itchy, you feel needy, you feel irritable, you feel not okay, and you're eating more of that food, not to get high at all, to get normal. Like you need that food to get some relief, to get back to normal, back to baseline. So I think obesity and its consequent diabetes, right, the sister disease, are escalating because of the proliferation of sugar and flour. Right now in the United States, 80% of the calories in the supermarket are laced with added sugar. I'm not talking about the lactose in milk, and I'm not talking about the fructose in whole fruit. I'm talking about added sugar. I'm talking about cane syrup or, maltitol, like whatever. Any added sweetener added to our food to make it sweeter is going to have the same impact. And, sugar and flour are dose-dependent drugs. Sugar is a chronic dose-dependent hepatotoxin. Dose-dependent means it depends on how much you take. Like, yeah, in the 1950s, people ate sugar, but they ate mostly real food and some sugar, right? Now, 80% of our calories are laced with sugar. So the obesity epidemic and the diabetes epidemic are purely because of the volume of processed foods, sugar and flour, that we are now consuming, and the fact that we have gotten hooked on them to the point where we can't stop as a society. And that's what happens when you consume too much of these drugs, is you get diabetes. I've been addicted to crystal meth. I've been addicted to crack cocaine, and I've been addicted to food. I've been addicted to sugar and flour. And in my experience personally, food was worse. The sugar and flour took me down harder. They were way, way, way harder to quit, way harder to stay quit from, and way more isolating in the sense that nobody except the people that have it themselves, nobody understands food addiction. It's a profoundly embarrassing and shameful thing to be afflicted with, because if you haven't had it yourself, you don't understand. When you're trying to explain to someone, no, I can't eat that cookie because, frankly, you don't have enough cookies on that plate for me, you know? Like, there's 30 people here, and there look to be about 40 cookies there. I want all of them, and, you know, I don't want to stand here putting cookies into my mouth, you know, wondering who's noticing. There's 10 left on the plate. Can I go grab another couple before anyone else notices? You know, oh, now there's 3 cookies left on the plate. Can I swoop all of them into my purse and then go into the bathroom and eat them sitting on the toilet? You know, like, you know, these are the thoughts of a food addict. Nobody else gets that, right? The cookies go around, and other people are like hardly noticing them, maybe grabbing one, putting on it on a napkin, half eaten, continuing their conversation. The brain of a food addict is completely different. And there's something about the saboteur that goes along with food addiction that drives you to isolation. It just wants you to be alone. It wants you to pull down the shades. It wants you to just hide and procrastinate and eat. Just shut out the world, maybe watch TV, maybe grab a book. Those are allowed in the cave, but nothing else is allowed in that cave. You don't want to answer the phone. You don't want anyone to come over. If you've got a spouse, you wish they would leave. You want them to go on a trip. And it's just hide, procrastinate, and eat. It's in my experience, and I've been addicted to just about everything, it is the most profoundly isolating, shameful, hidden disease there is. And it lives out in the world, right? You walk among people and you're eating with them, but the reality is you need more and you need them to go away so you can keep eating.
Susan's personal story of addiction moved me deeply. It was the words and the phrases she used and the look in her eye. I could tell she'd been down there in that black well where I've been. Have you been there? I scored a perfect 10 on her addiction susceptibility test. Did you see yourself in any part of her story? I did. I had to stop filming and pull myself together during the interview. And I know at least some of you could also relate to her story by the comments that keep flying in. I can't wait until I have more time to dive into the community and find out and gather up your biggest challenges and questions, and then reach out to all these experts and further refine our understanding of this topic. Together, we'll discover solutions that will inform our own personal plans in a continuous cycle of learning and adjusting to meet our own unique needs.
For the past 33 years, we've been working with people that have these diseases of dietary excess. It used to be that conditions like diabetes and high blood pressure, autoimmune diseases were rare, that people that got those conditions were few and far between. In fact, we used to call those people kings because it was only the wealthy elite that could indulge in the dietary excesses that led and lead to these problems. Today, though, we have an epidemic. In 1986, there wasn't a single state in the United States that more than 14% of the population was obese. Today, 71% of the population in the United States are overweight or obese. By any definition, it is an epidemic. And it's it comes about in part because we change the nature of the food that we eat. We've started adding chemicals to the food that artificially stimulate the dopamine production in the brain in human beings. That dopamine is associated with pleasure. It makes food taste good. We like to indulge in that. We like the way it makes it feel. The consequence is obesity. The chemicals that I'm talking about that we're adding to our food supply include sugar, oil, and salt. So this modification of highly refined foods rather than whole plant foods that might have been more consistent in the past is leading to an epidemic of obesity and the diseases associated with obesity, not the least of which is diabetes. Perhaps more than any of the other conditions that we're seeing right now, diabetes is perhaps that's increasing the most rapid and is going to have the most consequences. What are we going to do about it? Ultimately, since dietary excess is the fundamental contributing cause of the condition, getting rid of dietary excess is going to have to be the fundamental intervention that's necessary to reverse the epidemic. And that means we need to change the nature of what we're eating. We have to get away from the animal-rich, highly processed sugar, oil, salt diet and getting back to whole plant food diets that are SOS-free. SOS is the international symbol of danger, and it stands for salt, oil, and sugar. And so for most people, because 93% of the calories that are consumed come from animal foods or highly processed pleasure-trapped chemicals, the idea of giving up animal foods and salt, oil, and sugar seems overwhelming because essentially you're giving up almost everything that most people are used to eating. And getting back to eating things like fruits and vegetables, starches like potatoes and sweet potatoes, minimally processed grains like rice and quinoa, beans like lentils and peas, perhaps small amounts of nuts and seeds and other richer plant-based foods. This kind of dietary change is really radical. I believe radical comes from the word radicus, which means root or cause. And so ultimately we do need a radical change if we're going to expect to see a major change in the health conditions of the people in our society. Making token changes, changing the color of your meat from red to white isn't going to do the job. You're going to have a wholesale change, giving up the animal foods, the highly processed chemicals added to food, and in turn adopting a whole plant food diet. The pleasure trap is the hidden force that undermines health and happiness. It's the reason why people are fat, sick, and miserable. And the pleasure trap essentially is the artificial stimulation of dopamine in your brain from exogenous stimulation. An example of that are the chemicals added to food, things like sugar, oil, and salt. Because we evolved in an environment of scarcity, human beings are intimately concerned and exquisitely designed as energy-conserving calorie detection devices. In the world of our ancient ancestors, the majority of people didn't survive, so they never passed on their DNA. The people that survived, the winners, are your relatives. And they had certain characteristics that allowed them to get enough to eat and not get eaten. And part of that ability was to be able to tell the difference between valuable foods, i.e. foods with high caloric density, and less valuable foods, foods that have lower caloric density, because the ones that could tell the difference, they got enough to eat. The ones that didn't make it. So you're imbued with a design that's very sensitive to this issue of caloric density, and in a natural setting it works great. You eat as much as you can, whenever you can, of the most concentrated foods available, and if you're really lucky, you'll live to reproduce. In the modern world, we've changed the environment because we've introduced these highly processed, concentrated foods. And now our instincts, which obviously haven't had enough time to catch up from an evolutionary standpoint, lead us astray. So if you eat as much as you can of the most concentrated foods that you can, you end up like the 71% of Americans today that are overweight or obese, because you will overconsume those foods. Now, in a natural setting, it's not that you never would have eaten concentrated foods, but they were seasonally limited. You were circumstantially limited. So the idea to achieve and maintain obesity would have been exceptionally rare. And now it's almost unavoidable unless you're aware of the pleasure trap, unless you're aware of this hidden force that undermines health and happiness. So to escape the dietary pleasure trap is particularly difficult. It's not just a question of recognizing it. You also have to realize, just like an alcoholic can become physiologically addicted to alcohol, that is, they'll drink not only to feel good, but to avoid feeling bad, the hallmark of addiction and withdrawal. A person that's addicted to the dietary pleasure trap now has to continue to eat concentrated amounts of concentrated food without Otherwise, they're going to experience withdrawal effects because they're literally addicted to this artificial stimulation. So one of the important things is to recognize the pleasure trap, and then the second problem is developing a strategy not only to escape it, but then in order to stay away from it, maintain an environment that's going to be conducive to optimum health. For example, an alcoholic that doesn't realize drinking is the problem, that's making their life less than desirable, is unlikely to be successful in deciding to quit drinking on their own. If they become aware that, oh, the drinking's the problem, it's not that easy to just say, oh, it's the alcohol, no problem, I won't drink anymore. Even though that's a simple solution, it's not an easy one to implement. Once a person decides to quit drinking, and if they're successful at quitting drinking, they still have to stay successful. For example, you don't tell most alcoholics that the first job they should take once they become sober is to be a bartender. And the reason is it's harder to make 20 decisions a day not to drink than to make 1 or 2 decisions a day not to drink. So it's probably not the best job for the newly sober alcoholic to put themselves in an environment of constant temptation. But that's exactly what we do with people that are trying to lose weight. We don't put them in an environment that's supportive. We put them in an environment where everywhere they go, everybody's trying to give them cupcakes and fast food, and they're venting fumes down to the street, and all the quick, fast, easy, simple stuff is concentrated, highly processed, pleasure trap, chemicalized foods. And on the other hand, if you want to eat healthy, you have to go and shop and chop and put extra effort in. So everything's set against you to be successful, which may be why the success rate for people trying to lose weight is exceptionally low with conventional standards, because it's equivalent to telling alcoholics, well, look, just drink beer and wine. You don't tell alcoholics that they should stop drinking hard liquor, but it's okay to drink beer and wine, because it doesn't work. And it doesn't work to tell overweight people to keep eating the chemicals that are fooling their brain that led them to the obesity. What works with alcoholics is to tell them to stop drinking and help them develop a strategy to not drink each day. And the strategy that I found is most successful for people that are overweight or have conditions like diabetes is to help them stop eating the chemicals that are fooling their brain and adopt a health-promoting, whole plant food, SOS-free diet and support that each and every day. And what's amazing is if people adopt those principles, they get very consistent, predictable results. This is not a mysterious condition that's untreatable or unknowable. This is a well-understood, straightforward treatment protocol. It's just difficult to do, not because it's complicated, but because we live in a world designed to make us fat, sick, and miserable. In the world of our ancient ancestors, getting enough to eat and not getting eating was the primary biological imperative of life, and it was very difficult. And in fact, the majority of people that were ever born on this planet never survived long enough to reproduce. They're the losers. They're not the winners. Your relatives were the winners. They were the few that managed to survive. If you think about it, if your parents hadn't survived, you wouldn't be here. If your grandparents hadn't both survived, you wouldn't be here. If your great-grandparents had, if any one of your relatives for 1,000 generations hadn't made it, you wouldn't be here. You're the end result, the piece de resistance of a long chain of successful reproduction. And those characteristics that worked so well for your ancient ancestors don't work quite as well for you today because we changed the environment in which you live. But your genes are the same. Your biological programming is essentially the same. And as a consequence, the instincts that allowed your ancestors to survive can short-circuit your success in the modern world. And that's why we have to take a look at our diet and lifestyle issues and realize that, yes, the biology says eat the most concentrated foods you can get your hand on, eat as much as you can and push everybody else out of the way, may not be the best strategy today for you to adopt a health-promoting diet and lifestyle. There's a lot of old wives' tales out there about how dietary patterns or frequency is going to affect your metabolic rate and all the rest of it. And most of these changes in metabolism are transient. They're not sustained. For example, right now there's a lot of different strategies that people develop to try to enhance weight loss. For example, intermittent fasting or limited feeding windows. They believe if they limit the number of hours a day in which they eat by not eating, say, too early or too late at night, they may affect their ability to sustain weight patterns. And in that, different people may find various strategies helpful, but the single biggest variable is going to be what are you eating? And if what you are eating are whole plant food that is free of the addition of salt, oil, and sugar, it's not going to be so critical about what you eat, how you eat, which 3 meals a day, 5 meals a day. That's not going to be the dominant rule. The big thing is what you're eating. Now, I'm not saying that some people, despite eating a whole plant food, SOS-free diet, won't get additional benefit from further manipulations in their own lifestyle and strategy, and that's fine. But let's not lose sight of the fact that the vast majority of the effect size that's going to determine your weight, your health, your ability to deal with your conditions is going to be what is it you put in your mouth, more so than necessarily the order you put it in or the hours you put it in, but what it is you put in. So the thing about willpower is that willpower, even if you're effective, is exhausting. It takes tremendous amount of psychological energy to resist temptation. It's much more efficient for most people to try to change their environment, i.e., don't bring highly processed foods into the house where in your moments of weakness you're going to indulge. People eat because they're tired. And so if they eat when they're fatigued and they feel better, they make an error of attribution and decide, well, they must have been hungry, when really what they should have done is gone to sleep. They eat when they're angry to feel better. People don't like psychological pain, so they'll eat to try to override the psychological pain with some physical pleasure. They're trying to stimulate dopamine in their brain. When I try to tell patients, they say, oh, I only eat chocolate when my husband makes me mad. And I'll say, well, if he makes you mad, sit him down and make him eat the chocolate. Why should you suffer? The idea being that we want to, if we're angry, let's dissipate our anger with exercise or a walk. If we're tired, let's go to sleep. And if we're hungry, then whole plant food without salt, oil, and sugar will meet your hunger needs. Now, some people say, well, I'm not hungry for whole plant foods. I'm only hungry for, peanut brittle or ice cream or something. That's not true hunger. That's appetite. And so there it's a sign for people that if you're hungry, but a whole plant food won't take the edge off that hunger, that's not hunger, okay? That you're eating for all kinds of other reasons may not be the very best strategy. If you eat enough low-density, high-nutrition foods in your diet, there's really not that much room left for other stuff, and it makes it much easier to make the decisions to not indulge. When is it hard to make good decisions about food? Is when you're hungry. When your brain is telling you that you're depleting your strategic fat reserves. Your brain's not that thrilled about you losing fat. You may think you want to lose fat, but when you're losing fat, your brain is saying, hey, what are you doing? We're hemorrhaging strategic fat reserves. You stop that. And go get me something to, normalize my blood sugar levels, impact my insulin, and get us back to normal. It'll be much happier if you're stable, wherever it is. Your brain is thinking, we worked hard to store all those fat stores, and now you're just frittering them away. Spring's going to come late, and you're going to die. So you got to remember, you're fighting 1 billion years of evolution here, too. It's not just your environmental situation and your social situation. There's complex factors at play here that are trying to undermine your success. You can see it as kind of a war. And so you have to be prepared to fight those battles. And one of the ways you can fight this battle is by trying to control your environment. Make sure that in your home, health-promoting choices are easily available. That if you have, to make an exception, make it not at your place of work or at your home. Make it where it is an exception. If you bring those exceptions into the house, it's not going to be long before those exceptions become the rule. The higher the caloric density, the more dopamine is stimulated in the brain. For example, if you have salad, it has 100 calories a pound. So your brain says, oh, salad, 100 calories a pound. I would need to eat 20 pounds a day to survive. If I started eating a salad at 6 a.m., and I ate all the way through the day and all the way through the night, I still could not get 20 pounds of salad in, which means I'm not going to survive on salad alone. If all I'm eating is salad, I'm going to die. So your brain knows that, and your brain's not stupid. So when you put salad in front of your brain, it says, oh, okay, fine. If there's nothing else to eat, I'll have some salad. But it's not going to be excited about it. Even though salad may be extremely nutritious food, it has fiber, water, minerals, all kinds of great stuff, it doesn't have the caloric density. Fruit, on the other hand, has 300 calories a pound. It has 3 times the caloric density of salad, and to most people it tastes a lot better because it does have a higher caloric density. So your brain squirts out a little more dopamine. You get a little more pleasure. The higher the caloric density, the more dopamine, the more pleasure, the more you like it. That's part of what liking food is. Potatoes, rice, and beans have 500 calories a pound. So you only need 4 pounds of those a day to survive. And, although it still takes quite a bit of time to get it in, you can do it. Something like ice cream has 1,200 calories a pound. Okay? Massively more caloric density than you'd get from whole natural foods. And you like it more. It's interesting, if you take ice cream and melt it down to room temperature, it's described as sickly sweet. It's so sweet it tastes sick. But when it's cold like ice cream, it tastes really good to people. Well, why is that? It's got the same amount of sugar, but when it's cold, you can't taste it. You are not really good at detecting something that's artificially cold like ice cream. When you warm it to room temperature, you can taste what's there, and it makes you sick. It makes you just as sick when it's cold, but you don't know it because you've bypassed your normal filtration mechanism that tells you that something's too much or too little. Something like bread has 1,500 calories a pound, and that's before you turn it into a butter boat and put coagulated cow pus all over it. At 1,500 calories a pound, because this is a product that's been ground into a flour, dehydrated, it's hyper concentrated, it's very appealing. At 1,500 calories a pound, you only need a little over a pound a day in order to meet your caloric needs. Yet 500 calories of bread only takes about 1/3 of the volume of the stomach, whereas 500 calories of potato will fill the entire stomach up. So you can see the more processed foods are, the more likely you are to overeat them. Something like pure sugar is 1,800 calories a pound. So you expose yourself to pure sugar, your brain is squirting out all kinds of dopamine. That's why you can take almost any highly processed food, put enough sugar on it, and people will think it's appealing. And something like chocolate has 2,500 calories a pound. I mean, you might as well just melt it down and rub it right on your belly and hip where it's going to end up. At least then you could wash it off and not carry it around all week. There's an interesting survey of women. They asked women, which would you rather do, have mad, hot, passionate sex or eat chocolate? The 2 most common responses, what kind of chocolate and how many pieces are we talking about? These concentrated foods are highly appealing because they artificially stimulate dopamine cascade in the brain. The more dopamine, the more pleasure, the more you like it. And just like any addict, now you're taking foods not only to try to induce the positive response, but you actually continue to eat to avoid the withdrawal effects, the hallmark of addiction. So although it may be less intense than some of the recreational drugs people use, it's still working on the same neurocascade. So, again, people love good news about their bad habits. They're always trying to find some reason to justify their bad habits. Red wine, it's got resveratrol in it. Yeah, well, there's a little bit of antioxidant in resveratrol. It comes from the skin of grapes. If you want resveratrol, eat some grapes. You don't have to drink wine with all of its health-compromising components, including the fact that it's got 7 calories per gram. It's almost as high a caloric density as pure fat. It's why men get those really attractive beer bellies when they drink enough alcohol. The idea of, they'll say, well, it thins the blood. Well, does it? Yeah, it turns out alcohol has an effect very similar to aspirin in thinning the blood. So if you're on a greasy, fatty, slimy, dead, decaying flesh diet at high risk for a clotting stroke and you drink alcohol or take aspirin, you may have a slightly lower risk of a clotting stroke. What they don't tell you is it may increase your risk of a hemorrhagic stroke, and it doesn't appear to reduce your all-cause mortality. So if it's important to you that you die from a hemorrhagic stroke rather than a clotting stroke, maybe it has some role in your program. But overall health, let's not pretend that just because people try to come up with some good news about their bad habits or that there's something that makes this somewhat less bad than something else, it rises the level of being health promoting. It's not true. What we don't want is health foods, things like dark chocolate and red wine and coconut, whatever. What you want is healthy foods. Fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. Whole plant foods free of added salt, oil. And, the idea that these problems are being passed on to our children, that they're adopting these highly processed food diets, makes healthcare a growth industry, literally. Because what you're looking at is going to be an epidemic of chronic degenerative diseases, particularly conditions like diabetes, that are going to have devastating effects on whatever healthcare system we decide to put together, whether it's 1-payer, 4-payer, 6-payer. I don't think it will pale in comparison to the importance of actually trying to treat health promotion. If we really want to do something about healthcare costs in the United States. We need to start teaching health promotion, trying to teach people what they're going to need to do to get healthy and stay healthy. And because no amount of medical care is going to answer that problem. We spend 2.5 times as much per person on health care in the United States as they do in Europe right now, but we're not living longer and we're not living better. If you look at life expectancy and healthy life expectancy, both of them pale. So either it's not that we're not necessarily spending enough money, but what we're spending the money on may not be on the right area. And I believe that one of the areas that we're deficit in is health promotion, teaching people that health is a result of healthful living, and the focus should be on diet, sleep, and exercise. There's always been a lot of propaganda around food and what you can or should eat. And my colleague, Dr. John McDougall, likes to say that people love to have good news about their bad habits. And basically what you have right now is a lot of competing interests. People, for example, that are trying to defend the products they sell, the meat, fish, fowl, eggs, and dairy products. Those industries are, diligently out there trying to support their products as being health promoting. You have the processed food industry, which is heavily involved in promoting heated, beaded, treated, chopped, diced, processed crap, pretending that it's like good for you because they've fortified it or they've, made it higher in this or lower in that. The bottom line is what we need to do is adopt a whole plant food, SOS-free diet. The problem is there's not a lot of people that are financially benefited if everybody starts going back to eating whole plant foods that are sugar, oil, and salt-free. So you're not going to see a lot of advertising, promotion, marketing, and nonsense. And of course, there's always people trying to tell you that you can get what you want without having to pay the price, and promising you that you can go on the dead Dr. Atkins diet or the, whatever it is, and it's going to get you what you need. The problem is it's not true. Health results from healthful living. Healthful living involves diet, sleep, exercise. So if you want to get healthy, you have to pay the price of living healthy, and that means you adopt a health-promoting diet. From my viewpoint, a health-promoting diet is a whole plant food diet that's free of sugar, oil, and salt. We can talk about sleep and the importance of sleep, that people get enough rest, that they wake spontaneously feeling refreshed. And in terms of exercise, that you do what it takes to build flexibility, strength, as well as aerobic conditioning. These are not complicated issues, but they're difficult for people to do because we live in a society designed to make people fat, sick, and miserable, and to give them what they want, not what they need. And what people want is to be able to indulge in their pleasure trap behaviors without actually paying the price. And what they need is to understand the nature of the pleasure trap. Well, if a person's on a standard American diet, if they're on kind of that sad diet, there's almost nothing they can do that's going to not be an improvement. And so it's certainly easy for people to make errors of attribution and decide because they're on a diet that's somewhat less bad than the diet they were on before and they're starting to get some clinical improvements, therefore they found the answer. The problem is many of those changes are going to be transient and they're going to be helpful to a certain degree. So something being less bad doesn't make it good. It just makes it less bad. What we really want to do is encourage people to adopt a health-promoting diet. And again, if people adopt a whole plant food, SOS-free diet, what happens is they will get consistent, predictable results, and they'll be able to sustain those results long-term without compromising their health. There's a lot of things that you can do. For example, if your only goal is to lose weight, and you're not worried about health, there's lots of things that are effective at losing weight. You can cut your thigh off at the hip and be 40 pounds lighter by morning. That doesn't necessarily make it health promoting. Look at these people that adopt drug addiction as a behavioral pattern. They become oftentimes very thin. Doesn't make it healthy. People can adopt a greasy, fatty, slimy, dead, decaying flesh diet and proportionally lose some weight, but that doesn't mean they're not going to necessarily pay a price for it. The idea isn't just to lose weight, it's to hopefully get healthy. And getting healthy, it means adopting a health-promoting diet and lifestyle. Unfortunately, the changes with diabetes tend to be slow. They're insidious. And so it's not something you go from one day to having no symptoms to the next day necessarily being devastated. Many times these changes are slowly progressive. So as people gain weight and their insulin resistance starts to increase, They'll notice changes oftentimes in terms of energy, fatigue, concentration. Eventually, as the problem gets worse, they may notice urinary frequency or dysphagia. They may notice increased appetite, an aberrant appetite. They may have problems with emotional volatility, vulnerability to infection. They may have wounds that stop healing as well. Objective changes begin to show up. Blood sugar levels rise. They may begin spilling sugar in their urine. Eventually, neuropathy and other neurological changes may occur. And, of course, there's dramatically increased risk for heart attack and stroke, and probably also for some forms of cancer. So these changes can take years or decades before it becomes obvious. And a lot of times people don't necessarily make the connection between the symptoms they're having today and their diet lifestyle choices that they've been making for weeks, months, or years. It's often not just diabetes either. There's other things associated with this syndrome, including their blood pressure start to rise. They notice changes in all types of functions. And sometimes it's not until a person experiences some functional change that they're particularly distressed about that they'll be motivated to necessarily take action on it.
Dr. Goldhammer, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
I appreciate it. Just personally, as a takeaway, because we're going to overwhelm people with information, and they just need, just short. Hey, John, look, man, you're in trouble. This is what you need to do. A, B, C. Hit me.
Greasy, fatty, slimy, dead, decaying flesh, processed foods, get fat, sick, and miserable just like everybody else. So you're not giving anything up. This is just an experiment we're trying to do. Just long enough to get, so you can decide objectively, is it worth all the extra effort? Because it will be a problem. It is a challenge. But I've never actually had anybody do that, come back and say, I did all that, I lost all that weight, it wasn't worth it. I want to be miserable like everybody else. Though I did have my mom tell me, she's now 91, and she said that all 52 of her lifelong friends are now dead. The last one just passed away. And they all gave her trouble about her crazy diet and all this kind of stuff. She said the worst part is now all of her friends are dead and there's nobody left to say, I told you so.
All right, got it. I hope you appreciate the power of the pleasure trap like I do. Later in this series, you're going to find out 3 more traps that our genes have in store for us and how to beat them. Coming up in episode 6 tomorrow, we'll introduce the other environmental factors that can contribute to our diabetes and obesity, which we know now is the birthplace of a host of disorders called metabolic disorder. Moms are going to find out what they can do now to protect generations of their children. And we'll also discover how to protect ourselves from 3 hidden toxins that have spread across the globe and 2 detox mechanisms we need to be aware of that help keep us clean inside. Wasn't Susan amazing on food addiction? I had no idea about food addiction, but she was right. And Dr. Alan Goldhammer, he was as skeptical about me as Dr. Furman was in episode 3. He hoped I was going to make it, but wasn't sure. He wasn't sure if I had the will to turn it around, to get out of the pleasure trap. Well, I found the inspiration and hope to make the changes I needed, and I escaped the pleasure trap. You'll also get to see me unite with Dr. Goldhammer in episode 9, as well as Dr. Furman. Docs, I did it. And as I like to say, if I did it, anyone can do it. If you missed an episode, or you're really inspired and you just want to get all the episodes right now to get started on your journey, or you just want to share it with someone else to get them started now, then go for it. Under this video, you have a chance to own the series at a discount, including all the episodes, plus the full-length interviews of each expert with everything transcribed for you to also read or search. It also includes audio versions of everything. Plus, you get a second copy to share with someone that really needs it. You and your friend will also get to join our vibrant community of other Thrivers in our Thriver support group. We get testimonials coming in day after day. People are sharing their progress on their journey and inspiring others with hope for change, and you can too. Click on the button below to join our community and own your copy of iThrive for you and a friend. Your support of this mission allows me to continue to get this message out to everyone that needs it, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity to serve you. Whether you choose to own the series today or not, Keep watching this series. Share it with your loved ones and get this message of hope out there. Let people in your life know that it's really possible to reverse diabetes and obesity and thrive again. Okay, watch for my next email with the link to tomorrow's episode. Good night.